A voice keeps pulling him back awake, and he stirs through a fog of confusion. Harsh light hits him as someone snaps at him to stop repeating himself, and he squints against the glare. Lying on the ground, he realizes this might be a world where he can finally be himself. When he looks around, he finds nothing but emptiness stretching forever. Then, a voice says he is finally awake, and his expression instantly tightens. Startled, he demands to know who spoke, and the answer tells him to look at his side. He glances down in shock and realizes the sword is talking, while the blade calmly confirms it. He jerks the sword up in disbelief, reeling from the impossible. His panic all of a sudden flips into wild excitement as he clutches the talking sword and declares this the greatest moment imaginable. The sword bluntly reminds him that he already died once, and he sheepishly admits that is true. He recalls that to transfer his data into this world, they copied his soul, and since they said he could bring anything that fit in his hands, he chose the katana from his family's storage chest. Holding the blade close, he says he looks forward to working together, but the sword questions why he keeps calling it such a strange name. The sword introduces itself as Hotaru and tells him he may call it Hotaru. He lights up as he repeats the name, then abruptly realizes the blade's true name must already have been engraved on it. Stunned, he blurts out that Hotaru was a lost artifact once entrusted to the northern and southern courts after the Pacific War, and he struggles to process that this is that very legendary sword. He bursts with joy and decides his grandfather must have been the one who stole it, praising the old man for hiding away such a treasure. Hotaru points out that he used the sword for over 3 years without ever understanding its inscription, then asks how he knows its name. He politely says it is nice to meet the sword and introduces himself as Fujinomiya Sojiro, adding that it is fine to call him Sojiro. Hotaru says Sojiro has a fine name and that she looks forward to their time together, while Sojiro answers in kind and then wonders whether his other sword, said to be a wakizashi, also has a name. He reasons that young swords probably cannot speak yet, though he has a feeling the other blade would rather be named by him, Sojiro. As he grips the shorter sword at his side, Sojiro decides its name should be Sakurai and fastens it with quiet satisfaction. Holding the blade close in the open field, he gently addresses it as Sakurai. Smiling brightly, Sojiro says that for now it is only the 3 of them here and urges them to support each other and do their best. Hotaru teasingly asks whether Sojiro, despite being a sword fanatic, has any interests beyond blades, even joking about other distractions. Sojiro right away insists that of course he does, and Hotaru approvingly remarks that healthy interests in other things matter too. He agrees they can leave that topic for later and says they should first focus on what lies ahead. As he scans the area and turns in place, Sojiro decides they should keep moving and notes a forest ahead while wondering which way to go. After getting a clearer look at the woods, he admits he does not want to head there, and Hotaru asks why. Thinking carefully, Sojiro explains that he knows almost nothing about this world and should avoid places where dangerous creatures might be hiding until he understands the risks. Hotaru says she understands his caution but points out that every option in sight looks rough. Sojiro suggests climbing the hill, and Hotaru agrees that a higher vantage point should reveal more options. He agrees at once and starts moving without hesitation. As he runs uphill, Sojiro marvels that the air smells incredible and that his body feels strangely light, while Hotaru calmly notes it. He begins to suspect that things in this world might simply come easier than they did on Earth. Spotting something ahead that from a distance looks unusual, Sojiro wonders what it is, and Hotaru says they might as well check. Reaching the top, Sojiro is relieved he avoided the forest and announces their arrival, until Hotaru all of a sudden calls his name and makes him turn. They find a sign pointing toward the city of Nikolaya and Zatil's tower with a warning about thieves, and Sojiro is stunned that he can somehow read these unfamiliar words. Seeing the directions, Sojiro decides going right is their only real option, though he worries about how long the trip might take. An hour later, there is still no sign of any town. Exhausted, Sojiro fears he will collapse if this goes on for days, and Hotaru bluntly reminds him that as a human like Louise, he still needs food and water. With the path ahead feeling unavoidable, Sojiro says he was already thinking that if he finds something in these woods, he might learn what kind of world this is. He decides they need to keep moving while he still has the strength. Noticing a path that avoids the forest, Sojiro suspects that means the forest is genuinely dangerous. When Hotaru all of a sudden hears screaming and urges him to run, Sojiro jolts but right away says he understands. He launches forward at once, throwing himself into a desperate sprint. The spell changes her condition in an unexpected way. Hotaru suggests that this world may have less gravity than Earth and tells him to keep running as though that explains everything. Following Hotaru's guidance, Sojiro is told to lean forward, shift his center of gravity, and run by kicking his feet backward against the ground. The advice works, and Sojiro all of a sudden shoots ahead with a startled cry as his speed sharply spikes. Realizing how easily he can run now, Sojiro excitedly calls out to Hotaru. Hotaru praises Sojiro's quick understanding and says that how fast he grasped and applied her advice proves his talent, leaving him flustered. As Sojiro keeps running, he admits he is starting to wear down and panics that being thrown into a fight now would be disastrous. Hotaru agrees and tells him that first he needs to secure food and information. Sojiro decides that if that is the case, he should move even faster. Hotaru urgently tells him to keep going straight and says he should see something after the next bend. Seeing the road ahead, Sojiro realizes this seems to be the only path leading out of the forest, and Hotaru notes it would be the perfect place for an ambush. A wagon comes into view on the road, and Hotaru right away tells Sojiro to crouch. As Sojiro hides beside the wagon, Hotaru observes that it looks like a large group and tells him to stay in the caravan's shadow so he can get a closer look. From hiding, Sojiro hears a girl being pressured to sign a contract and become someone's personal servant while the surrounding group watches and chatters. When a man grabs at the girl aggressively and belittles her value, she freezes in shock as the scene turns ugly. The burly guard curses at the girl and warns her not to come any closer. Sojiro is confused, and Hotaru quickly identifies the girl as an acolyte. Hotaru tells Sojiro to look through a crack into the carriage, and he carefully peeks inside. Inside the carriage, a person lies in a deeply uncomfortable condition, making the whole situation feel even worse. The effect of the spell pushes her past her limit. Hotaru urgently tells him to control himself, warning that even an amateur could notice it. Sojiro silently steadies himself, and when Hotaru asks if he can do it, he gives a firm nod while readying his weapon. Hotaru lays out the plan, telling him to strike the person inside first, then quickly close the distance and stop the leader with a single blow. As Sojiro grips his sword, Hotaru assures him she is right there with him and promises to warn him directly in his head if any danger appears. Hotaru starts guiding his stance in detail, telling him to begin from an offensive posture, lower his arm, and step to the right as Sojiro steels himself and focuses on the 1-meter gap. Sojiro's strike hits the burly man's neck, and the man can only let out a broken breath sharply as the blow lands before anyone can react. He follows through in one clean motion, and the watching group realizes in shock that he dropped the target instantly, proving he can act without hesitation. As he moves, one thing becomes clear: he shows no hesitation at all and seems unmistakably experienced in real combat despite his age. While the men remain clustered by the carriage, the girl stares in stunned silence as Sojiro slips forward step by step and quietly tells her not to scream. One of the bandits finally catches movement and reacts in confusion, but Sojiro bursts into their midst before they can make sense of it. He sweeps low and fast, taking down one attacker as the others cry out for their boss in panic and stumble back from the sudden assault. Another attack comes straight at him, but Sojiro twists away at the last instant, his focus sharpening as he tracks the threat. From the brush, Hotaru quietly tells Sakura that they need to stay apart for a while, keeping her hidden from the fight. Sojiro surges ahead again and promises he will get her back, throwing himself deeper into the clash without slowing. The girl watches in alarm as Sojiro takes down another man, and the scene erupts with cries while he keeps driving the attacker's back. Sojiro pushes forward in a sweeping strike, throwing the remaining robbers into panic as one is knocked back and the others reel from his sudden charge. Hotaru urgently warns him that an attack is coming from behind on the left, and Sojiro instantly shifts his footing to answer it. He pivots through the opening and drops another attacker with a sharp counter before the man can recover. A robber lashes out and curses at him, but Sojiro slips inside the attack and takes him down in one clean motion. His focus sharpens again, and he twists away as he senses another threat closing in. Sojiro pulls the girl close behind him and steadies her with one hand, placing himself between her and the danger as she stares up in shock. Keeping his eyes on the battlefield, Sojiro calmly states that only 2 enemies are left, while the girl listens in tense silence behind him. The scene abruptly shifts to a grim account stating that Fujinomiya Sojiro died at 16 from a stab wound after bravely fighting off 2 robbers. As a small child sits alone, the narration adds that something had always been tied to his heart. The child wonders why they had to kill them, while the narration says the murder led to a life in prison and calls it a cruel judgment for someone so young. The narration explains that Sojiro had always seemed somewhat strange, but those odd habits never affected his daily life, and he was not the kind of person who could be called evil. One surviving robber panics and curses their bad luck, saying everything had been going well and blaming their leader's greed for dragging them into this disaster, while Sojiro stands firm with the girl behind him. As the 2 robbers falter, one urges the boss to get out of there and says he can use his shoulder for support while they retreat. The injured leader trembles and admits they need to run, while the other robber argues that there is no shame in losing and says they cannot beat Sojiro. The leader right away rejects that plan and warns that if they run, Sojiro will just catch them. The boss all of a sudden bolts forward and tells his companion to slow Sojiro down for him, brushing off the man's shocked cry as he abandons him and runs. Watching the escape, Sojiro quietly asks whether he really has to let that man live. The girl answers right away that he does not have to spare him at all. Her reply hardens his resolve, and Sojiro brings the fleeing robber down in one decisive strike while declaring that he wants a world where he can live as he chooses. The last robber trembles in terror after the body falls nearby, and he weakly begs Sojiro to spare him. After dealing with the fleeing leader, Sojiro turns to the last robber and quietly asks what he plans to do now. The girl coldly reminds him the couple had begged for their lives too, and asks whether he listened even once. Her words make Sojiro freeze, and he quietly takes them in as the last robber lies crumpled nearby. Looking down at his blade, Sojiro asks Hotaru whether she is alright, and the sword remarks on how calm he stayed through his first killing. Relieved, Sojiro thanks Hotaru and admits that with her beside him, he feels like nothing can scare him. The spell takes hold in a way no one anticipated. The girl watches in confusion, wondering whether talking to his sword is normal, then asks if he plans to collect the robber's weapons. Sojiro awkwardly rejects the idea at first, but then takes her suggestion and asks what they should do with the bandit's gear, wondering if it can be sold. He soon spots Sakura lodged in the fallen robber's head and casually remarks that there she is. As he pulls the blade free, Sojiro lightly apologizes to Sakura for leaving her in such a grim place, then trails off in embarrassment. The weight of the moment hangs there, refusing to break. The scene remains locked in uneasy stillness. The exchange leaves both of them visibly rattled. The tense pause stretches on without shifting the moment. The pressure lingers, spilling into what comes next. The silence between them becomes impossible to ignore. The weight of the moment hangs there, refusing to break. The air stays charged as neither of them says a word. The scene remains locked in uneasy stillness. The exchange leaves both of them visibly rattled. As they move on, he notes that roads fit for driving are rare in this world, and the group heads for Malia, the nearest town. Riding through the forest, he quietly admits something to himself while watching the maid beside him. He looks at her in silence and is struck by how composed she is as she calmly handles the reins. His thoughts become awkward, and the moment turns tense as he fixates on her appearance. As the sun sinks lower, she suggests they camp there for the night. They stop to rest, and a pot hangs over the fire while the meal cooks with a soft crackle. She sets out a steaming bowl and explains that she only used what she had on hand. Offering him the food, she says she prepared it the way it was made in her home country. He eagerly drinks it down, and she urges him to eat because it has been so long since his last meal. While eating, he reflects on how strange his life has become and how much has happened, as memories of masked attackers and the blade called Hotaru crowd his mind. When he all of a sudden starts crying, she anxiously asks if the food was so bad that it made him cry, and he can only stare back in stunned confusion. The situation reaches a point neither of them expected. He thanks her with complete sincerity. The discomfort between them rises without warning. He admits that he truly knows nothing and politely asks her to teach him. He asks her to teach him everything about this world as the night quietly deepens around them. She hesitates and says that is a lot to explain, then suggests they should first get to know each other better. Agreeing with that, she says she will begin by showing him who she is, and a revelation appears before them. As she operates the glowing display, he stares in shock and blurts out his amazement at what he is seeing. Seeing his reaction, she explains that it is a status window, and though she does not know how it works, she can at least read it. As he studies the strange display, he realizes it must be the reading skill, and notes in awe that it grants useful abilities like language, reading, and identification. He examines Sistina's status and is stunned by how high her maid-related skills are, while some listed abilities make things awkward and leave him unsure what they imply. The sight makes her recoil in panic, and his shocked outburst only deepens her embarrassment. Flustered and red-faced, she demands to know how he could read text that should have been encrypted. He apologizes and says he simply read whatever was there, then realizes the strange literacy must be the power she called God's favor. Trying to recover, she asks if he can show her his own window too, and he agrees, but admits he has no idea how to do that. When she asks whether he truly does not know, he calmly confirms that he does not. She moves in to guide him directly, telling him to aim his thoughts toward her and chant for the word to appear. A new status window appears before them, and while he stares in surprise, she confirms with relief that it worked. Grinning with excitement, he decides that this world's magic words are exactly his kind of thing. He hesitantly lets her check, and when the status window all of a sudden shifts, he notices in surprise that it moved. She leans in and silently studies him, watching his reaction with a steady, curious stare. After thanking him, she reaches toward the display and he tests it himself, noticing with surprise that a tap makes it react and vanish. As the window disappears at his touch, she asks for his name, and he answers while trying to make sense of the strange interface. He introduces himself as Fujinomiya Sojiro, and she repeats the name before asking whether he knows anything about the Acolyte class. The curse makes her situation increasingly unstable. His thoughts drift to another questionable skill on her status, and while he comments on it internally, her innocent expression only makes the moment more awkward. When she clears her throat to pull him back, he can only admit that he does not know the answer. Since he is still lost, she decides to explain it herself, while he reflects that her status description had been easy enough to read but far too detailed. She begins simply, saying that acolytes are like fighting monks educated at a temple for specially gifted children. Sestina explains that among acolytes, protection, healing, and negotiation are the three main paths, and says she is a holy acolyte who has mastered all of them. She adds that after becoming a holy acolyte, she was granted the Book of Wisdom skill, which she stresses is extremely important. With some hesitation, she admits that she had wanted to keep that part hidden. Sojiro realizes he had already seen it and quietly admits that he did notice. She goes on to explain that acolytes have a special ability called contract. As chains appear as a metaphor, she says acolytes must fulfill the words of honor tied to any contract they make. She explains that while under a contract, they become more capable and can fight better, but that power only becomes available after entering one. She reveals that a wealthy couple once planned to place her under contract with their child after making a large donation to the temple. She says that is why she still has not made a contract with anyone. Lowering her head, she concludes that this is why she could not use her power to save anyone. She says she could only defend herself against the bandits when they attacked and had to leave the others behind. As the villagers surround Sestina, they note that even if she was not hurt, what happened still cannot be ignored. Sojiro realizes that although Sestina survived, she still could not do anything to stop people from being killed. Sestina tells Sojiro she knows what he is thinking and explains that acolytes are powerless in circumstances like that. With rising emotion, she reveals that an acolyte can only use her powers while under a contract, and if she breaks that rule she will lose those powers, leaving her unable to save anyone. Seeing tears in her eyes, Sojiro quietly calls her name as the weight of her confession settles over them. In the tense silence, Sestina says Sojiro is a strange person. She recalls seeing him from her window and says that despite having no real fighting skill, he still moved the way he did. Staring at him, she adds that his profession is a magical swordsman, something she says she has never heard of. Sojiro awkwardly guesses that it might simply be an uncommon class, while inwardly cursing the god behind all of this. The moment keeps its weight, with no clear shift in sight. The silence between them becomes impossible to ignore. The pressure carries forward without easing up. The scene continues beneath a cloud of quiet tension. The tense pause stretches on without shifting the moment. The weight of the moment hangs there, refusing to break. The air stays charged as neither of them says a word. The silence between them becomes impossible to ignore. The scene remains locked in uneasy stillness. The scene continues beneath a cloud of quiet tension. As they inspect Sakura's status, they note that her rank is D with refinement value 33 and spirit absorption 47, and are surprised to find support skills like empathy, a sense of presence, agility correction, hit correction, and magic correction, leading Sojiro to admit that Sakura-chan's abilities are actually pretty good. While wondering what refinement value even means, he all of a sudden notices that the sword also has a life-changing skill, and right away drops the thought as the discovery shifts the mood. Excited, Sojiro proposes trying anthropomorphism right away and calls on Hotaru-san as he prepares to test the sword's power. The sword responds calmly, telling him to unsheath it and leave her over there just as requested. As the blade is drawn in a flash, Sojiro braces himself and mutters that this is it, while the word anthropomorphism hangs over the moment. A woman appears, quietly marveling that this is a human body and wondering if anything could be more unsettling, making the atmosphere all of a sudden feel far more tense. Sojiro erupts in shock and confirms that the weapon really did turn into a person, while the girl beside him stares in disbelief at the impossible sight. Flustered by how abruptly everything changed, he awkwardly suggests finding her some clothes, and the girl turns toward him in visible surprise. She rejects the idea at once and instead tells Sojiro that she does not need clothes and wants him to hand her the scabbard. The scabbard all of a sudden spins through the air with a violent whoosh, catching everyone off guard as Sojiro blurts out in confusion. After taking the scabbard, Hotaru calmly decides this arrangement will do, looking completely satisfied with her new form. Hotaru then turns to Sojiro and says his name, drawing his nervous attention as her hand reaches toward him. Before he can react, the distance all of a sudden becomes uncomfortably close, and Hotaru quietly notes that he is warm, leaving Sojiro flustered and overwhelmed. With a faint smile, Hotaru remarks that having a human body is truly a remarkable thing. Sojiro clings to her in visible relief and excitement, confessing that he is simply happy he can hold Hotaru like this. Still holding him, Hotaru questions what Sojiro is even saying as the awkward closeness lingers. Hotaru then declares that from now on she can interact more directly, making the atmosphere instantly far more uncomfortable. Her wording stuns both Sojiro and Sistina, and they freeze as they try to process what she really means. As Sojiro panics and reaches toward her, Hotaru lightly dismisses it and says she was only joking. The curse deepens its grip on her condition. Sojiro, still overwhelmed, begs Hotaru to give him a break while Sistina stands by and watches the exchange. Hotaru calmly says that for now she will keep watch tonight and tells the other two to get some rest. Sistina quietly says that tomorrow she may have something very important to tell him. When Sojiro asks her to be more specific and say it now, Sistina firmly refuses. Hotaru admits she cannot make up her mind and asks him to give her one night, and Sojiro agrees. As the camp settles and the fire crackles, Sojiro lies awake wondering what Sistina wanted to say. Seeing Sistina asleep nearby, Sojiro anxiously wonders if she might be thinking about leaving, then right away rejects the thought. In the stillness of night, Hotaru all of a sudden asks Sojiro what is wrong. Startled to find Hotaru close beside him, Sojiro nervously calls out to her. Sojiro glances toward the sleeping Sistina and then back at Hotaru, his face tightening with embarrassment as the tension sharpens. Hotaru notices he still cannot sleep, and Sojiro admits that rest is not coming to him at all. Hotaru draws him close and gently comforts him, saying he has already suffered far too much. Holding him quietly, she reflects that he died and was thrown into this world only to be forced back into battle. She asks how many people had died by his hand in his previous world. Sojiro answers that he never counted because, to him, those lives had not been worth counting. Hotaru presses further and asks whether the first was his father, and Sojiro confirms it while she notes that he had at least killed 2 in self-defense. He recalls that the man had been his father, a worthless person who needed money and tried to rob his ex-wife. Sojiro remembers his own father stabbing him and says that after that moment, nothing else mattered anymore. He recounts that he cut his father down because he had no other choice. Sojiro concludes that the man would have robbed both his mother and him, and Hotaru listens in stunned silence. Hotaru calmly says she sees and understands, her expression softening as Sojiro's embarrassment deepens. Hotaru concludes that if that is the case, she will stay with him, leaving Sojiro stunned. As she leans in close, Hotaru reasons that if he is uneasy because the silence feels strange, then this should help, but Sojiro hurriedly objects. With the atmosphere growing more strained, Hotaru asks if her closeness displeases him, and Sojiro flusteredly insists that it does not, only that he does not know how to respond. Hotaru reminds him that when she was still a katana, he always kept her close and that they spent every night together. Overwhelmed by her words and nearness, Sojiro can only call out Hotaru's name in confusion. As she presses close and the interaction grows even more awkward, Hotaru fondly notes that they really did stay together like this. Sojiro nervously asks whether this makes her nostalgic, and Hotaru quietly admits that it does. Moving even closer, Hotaru says she can still sense his warmth and pulse, making the tension between them impossible to ignore. The tense moment is abruptly broken when Sistina all of a sudden wakes in shock, and Sojiro reacts in alarm as he notices her. Lying there in the lingering quiet, Sojiro is described as someone who had lived in utter loneliness, with a hatred of evil unlike anyone else's, and the narration concludes that this is why the world had to fully accept him. Hotaru gently adds that he also needs a partner who will wholly accept him as well. Flushed with emotion, Sistina praises Hotaru as amazing, then hesitates as if struggling to continue. Still faltering, Sistina repeats that she has something more to say, but her nerves keep stopping her. As Hotaru watches from the side, she notices the shift in Sistina and remarks that the girl has finally made her move. Looking out at the night sky, Hotaru concludes that it seems Sistina has found her courage at last. Morning arrives, and the quiet scene opens with a simple exchange of greetings. Sojiro brings water and receives a thankful reply, then notices Sistina staring at him and awkwardly asks what is wrong. Gathering herself, Sistina nervously asks Sojiro if he would enter into a contract with her. In an exaggerated plea, figures bow before Sojiro and beg him to make a contract with their son, promising him all of their family's riches while desperately appealing to holy Acolyte Sistina. As the Duke keeps begging from the floor and offering treasure, he is firmly told to stop coming there and leave at once. Sistina calmly states that she understands and confirms that she will make a contract with him. Sojiro stares back in confusion and asks why she would want to make a contract with him. Hotaru notices him staring and tells him to stop gaping, while addressing Sistina with quiet composure. As Sojiro remains deep in thought, Sistina also lowers her gaze and seriously considers how to explain herself. Flustered, Sistina says the reason is not exactly that, then hesitates and struggles to put her feelings into words. Blushing, Sestina finally says she supposes it is destiny. She explains that if the Duke and Duchess had not come to the temple, she would still be doing her apprenticeship there, while they continue pleading in the background. Sojiro concludes that the Duke would have died, and Hotaru adds that he also would not have ended up saving her. Sestina explains that in reality the Duke had been taken away, they were attacked by bandits, he was killed, and she was nearly forced into a coercive contract with one of them. Sestina reminds Sojiro that he was the one who saved her, making her feelings unmistakably clear. She explains that, the day before, he asked her to teach him about the world, and she says she possesses the Book of Wisdom to do exactly that. Struggling to explain herself, Sestina admits she hated the helpless feeling of having power, but being unable to protect the people she wanted to save. Sojiro smiles and says he wants to travel with Sestina, then directly asks her to make a contract with him. Blushing with relief and joy, Sestina gratefully accepts and thanks him at once. As the ritual begins, Sestina composes herself in silence, and the scene turns solemn as the contract is prepared. Several contract forms appear before them, showing that there are different types of agreements with different conditions and ranks. Sestina explains that contracts come in stages from employment to lord-vassal to subordination, and that the more binding the contract, the greater the power granted to the acolyte, though ordinary contracts are usually written separately before a main contract and added later as a special clause. While reading the document, Sojiro says the subordination contract sounds extremely unsettling and asks her to summarize it simply. After a brief pause, he realizes the contract amounts to complete obedience. Sestina nervously confirms that the contract is complete, while the word obedience makes the moment deeply uncomfortable. She clarifies with a strained look that, in simple terms, it is equivalent to a slave contract. Hotaru laughs and says that option sounds good for Sojiro, and Sojiro casually agrees without a moment of hesitation. Sestina breaks into a sweat and admits she had expected as much from him. Sojiro all of a sudden calls Sestina's name and reaches toward the contract, catching her off guard. He boldly orders the document to be overwritten, forcing a dramatic change onto the contract. New clauses are added, including a one-time right to refuse authority and a condition to permit subordination only through a mutual lord-vassal contract. As Sestina panics and demands that everything from that point onward be deleted, Sojiro calmly points out that an acolyte can only use their power for their master, and loses that power if the bond is broken. Startled, Sestina recalls that she is only allowed to use her power when she judges it necessary to protect order, justice, and responsibility, making Sojiro realize there is a broader exception. Sojiro asks Sestina how that revised arrangement sounds to her. Sojiro imagines an awkward situation where he asks Sestina to bathe with him, gets flatly rejected, then begs anyway, and he forces himself to stay composed through the embarrassment. Sestina rushes in and demands to know how he rewrote the contract like that, insisting it should not have been possible at all, while Sojiro is left wondering what she means. She frantically explains that Acolytes' contracts are absolute and cannot be changed, and says they risk everything to find a worthy partner before trusting anyone with that bond. Misreading her flustered reaction, Sojiro thanks her and says he had not realized she felt that strongly about him, leaving Sestina even more shaken. Sojiro says that if she wants to know how he rewrote the contract, she should look at his skills because that will make it clear. Pointing to his status, he shows her a language skill and presents it as the answer. Sojiro explains that he can speak any language, and assumes that also means he can read and write any language. Sestina stares in surprise as Sojiro calmly concludes that he thought he might be able to rewrite the contract, so he simply did it. Sestina breaks into laughter, calls him unbelievable, and admits she thinks she has just encountered an absurdly extraordinary person. She reflects that an acolyte's training is severe, and that since childhood she devoted herself every day to mastering magic, combat, cooking, cleaning, and study. Sestina reflects that she longed to meet someone worthy of complete devotion. Placing her hand over the contract, Sestina formally recognizes Fujinomiya Sojiro as her master. As the contract activates, the bond is completed in front of everyone. Sestina tells Sojiro the ritual is finished and says she is now officially in his service as his acolyte. Sojiro awkwardly says he is looking forward to it, though he is visibly unsure. Noticing his reaction, Hotaru asks why he does not seem pleased, while Sojiro struggles to explain himself. Seeing Hotaru and Sakura, Sojiro realizes they are both here with him. He adds that he also met Sestina. Hotaru says he has been blessed with many good things at once, but warns that such fortune makes her fear something bad may be coming. As the two girls lean together with quiet laughter, the mood briefly turns light. Hotaru tells Sojiro that maybe this is just how things are for him, and that he should try to accept it. Sojiro quietly agrees and says he will try. As he reaches out, Sojiro admits he still knows almost nothing about this place, but says that if they do not mind, he wants to stay with them, and Sestina answers that he can leave everything to her. With the mood lifting, Sojiro thinks this feels surprisingly nice, while the others catch him getting carried away and Sistina happily tells him he may call her by name from now on. Sistina answers him with Master right away, leaving Sojiro startled by how instantly she accepted it. Embarrassed by her own excitement, Sistina apologizes and says it got to her head for a moment, then politely asks him to call her Sistina. Trying to figure out how they should address each other, Sistina suggests that in public she could call him Sojiro, but when they are alone she would call him Master. Flustered, Sojiro says that is fine and tells her she can call him whatever she likes, whenever she likes, and can be casual about it, while she still responds respectfully with Master. As they ride on in silence, Sistina quietly repeats the word Master to herself. While they travel together, Sistina asks what they should do next and wonders whether he has any particular goal in mind. Sojiro reflects that his goal had once been something handed to him by a god, when all he had really wanted was simply to live. He honestly admits that in this world he wants to be straightforward about how he feels. Sojiro says he does not really have any grand plan, and only wants to settle somewhere, live quietly day by day, and save money. Sistina answers that if he can live the way he wants, then that alone is enough, and she adds that being with him would make it even better for her. She lightly asks if he is surprised, then says she has no intention of breaking their contract. Smiling gently, Sistina explains that from another angle, his way of thinking simply means he is free to choose any goal he wants and can still become anything he wishes. Flustered, Sojiro says she is overthinking it, while Sistina points out that the city is already coming into view. As they reach the gate, the group is shown entering the city and being received by the guards. Passing through the entrance together, Sojiro looks ahead in surprise while Sistina and Hotaru stay close at his sides. Seeing the city spread out before him, Sojiro quietly realizes that this is the place. Entering the city together, Sojiro looks around and remarks that it seems like a busy town. As they pass the gate, Sojiro asks what they had been saying about the gatekeeper when they first arrived, while Sistina reacts like she all of a sudden remembers. Sistina explains that anyone entering the city normally has to pay a transit tax, but contracted acolytes and their masters are exempt if they identify themselves. Hearing that, Sojiro remarks that acolytes are impressive, and Sistina adds that in return they are expected to perform duties. Sojiro asks if that means working for the city, and Sistina says she will explain everything once they have settled in. Sistina admits that even with that obligation she had really hoped to enter the city without paying. Hotaru bluntly points out that they are still short on funds, and the group falls into an awkward silence. Hotaru reflects that they probably should have skinned more monsters, but then notes that they already packed quite a lot. Sistina explains that with the reward money from defeating the bandits and the money from the pelts they have, they should manage. Fidgeting nervously, Sistina hesitates and says she still needs his approval. Sistina forces herself to stay calm, thinking that even if she wants to send money to her late master's family for her own selfish reasons, it will be alright. When Sistina all of a sudden says she wants to do it, she quickly protests that she has not even explained the idea yet. Sojiro says he could not refuse after seeing how much this matters to her, and reminds her that they have to rely on each other. Sojiro understands that she wants to handle something herself by selling the cart, and he says they can send the remaining money later as long as they keep enough for themselves. Hearing that, Sistina brightens at once and happily agrees. The group heads together toward a large building in town, bringing the horse and cart with them. As they walk, Sojiro explains that by law any assets recovered from the bandits belong to those who stopped them, then gently reassures Sistina not to worry and says her wish to send money is not stealing from their reward. Arriving inside, Sistina politely asks whether the shop would buy their Rama and cart, while inwardly feeling overjoyed that she gets to travel under contract with people like them. The bespectacled man examines the animal and remarks that it is not a bad Rama. Stepping forward firmly, Sistina asks the merchant to bargain with them. The merchant quickly agrees, judges the Rama and cart to be valuable, and opens with an offer of 20,000 maru while fishing for more. Sistina right away counters that the offer is too low, points out that the Rama is young and healthy, and raises the price to 25,000 maru as the merchant admits he can work with that. The bargaining grows tense as the merchant goes to 26, Sistina calmly presses higher, and he finally reaches 27 while onlookers stare in surprise. Sweating under the pressure, the merchant admits she keeps catching him off guard and says that while the cart and Rama could have gone for 35,000 maru, he can only manage 29,000 or more. The magical effect on her grows harder to contain. Cracking at last, the merchant blurts out 35 and Sistina accepts with a bright smile and thanks him. As they leave, Sojiro asks why the merchant all of a sudden raised his offer, and Sistina proudly says it was all thanks to her negotiation skills. Sistina explains that her skills let her draw out the highest amount possible at exactly the right moment by pulling the merchant's strongest hidden price to the surface. Sojiro is amazed that she earned more money just by doing that, but Sestina shyly refuses praise and says she cannot take credit because it would feel like cheating. The group spots their lodging ahead, and with the sale finished, they decide they can finally relax for a bit. At the inn, the receptionist welcomes them, says the rate is 20 ma'aru per room, and asks whether they need 2. Sestina quickly answers that 1 room will be enough. Looking pleased with herself, Sestina remarks that her bold negotiating side is back again, while Sojiro reacts in surprise and Hotaru watches with a knowing smile. Once seated with food on the table, the group decides to enjoy a proper meal after the long journey to get there. As a drink is served, they realize it is alcohol and note that this seems to be the local standard. Sojiro comments that Hotaru all of a sudden started insisting on drinking, and she pushes back, saying she was not insisting. After tasting the food, Hotaru happily declares it delicious and adds that even the grilled vegetables are good. With the meal winding down, the group settles as everyone is now seated and calmer. Sestina turns serious and says they need to discuss their duty, explaining that they must explore the tower. Sestina explains that the tower is essentially a machine that gives birth to monsters, leaving the others visibly unsettled. Sestina explains from the book that there are around 10 primary towers that have existed for ages, endlessly releasing monsters, and that only 3 of those towers have ever been brought down. She says the land around those 3 towers became thriving safe zones free of demons, and for the safety and prosperity of other cities, they have to explore the towers. Sojiro says that sounds like a worthy cause, and Hotaru calmly shows that she understands. Hotaru adds that this is also the perfect chance for Sojiro and the others to train in a real battle, while her drunken mood makes the atmosphere more unruly. Sestina laughs and says Hotaru is such a dependable sword, while Sojiro reacts with awkward amusement. As they arrive, Sojiro realizes this place is the bathhouse. Standing under the water, Sojiro notes that it is not all that different, then catches himself and reflects again on how strange this world can be. Sestina looks confused, asks if it is a bath, and innocently wonders whether it tastes good. Sojiro, drenched and exasperated, thinks that was exactly the question he expected from her. Hotaru and Sestina declare that they want to take a real bath too, and the moment all of a sudden turns awkward for Sojiro. Hotaru leans in with a teasing smile and urges Sojiro to do something, while the playful mood around them instantly puts him under pressure. As he waits behind the divider, Sojiro tells himself it is not as if he is missing out, since Sakura is still with him, then wonders what she might look like if she ever became human. Once Hotaru returns, Sojiro asks how her first bath was, and she answers with calm curiosity while he waits for her reaction. Hotaru says it was not bad and explains that the hot water helped her relax. Sojiro says he would like to bathe in a hot spring again someday, and Hotaru quietly replies that they can hardly wait for that day. As Hotaru turns to him, she calls his name and Sojiro points out that Sestina still has not come back yet even though they are about to leave. Hotaru says they can continue until Sestina returns, then proposes that they train. She leads him to one side of the resting area and says they will use that half of the space for training. The interaction turns awkward as Hotaru proposes an unusual training method, while warning Sojiro that she will make it difficult for him. Surrounded by that deeply uncomfortable setup, Sojiro right away accepts and boldly claims he will handle it this time, leaving the moment charged with reckless tension. Hotaru brightly reminds Sojiro that he had admitted she helped him before, using his own words to corner him even more. Flustered but fired up, Sojiro accepts the challenge and urges them to begin at once. He lunges in right away, but Hotaru moves first, and the tense training begins with her calmly testing his reaction. The spell changes her condition in an unexpected way. Hotaru calmly guides him on, praising his approach while thinking she can control his movement by leading him around, and the situation remains tense. A woman nearby all of a sudden calls out, demanding to know what they think they are doing. The interruption shatters the mood at once, and Sojiro and Hotaru freeze as the onlookers turn toward them. Another bystander jokes that if they wanted to use the bench, they should have just said so, while someone else bluntly dismisses the scene, making it even more awkward for Sojiro. With a teasing wink, Hotaru lightly concludes that their training is over. Sojiro respectfully thanks Hotaru for the training, then hesitantly offers a handshake while addressing her formally. Hotaru blushes and tells Sojiro he is unbelievable, reacting to his bold response with amused approval. They finish with a handshake, and Hotaru gives his hand a firm squeeze as the awkward tension lingers between them. With a pleased smile, Hotaru praises Sojiro for turning his impulses into strength and tells him to repeat that every day until it becomes natural. Sojiro laughs to himself and marvels that Hotaru would turn even that impulse into a form of training. A girl approaches in the middle of the hallway, greets them, and asks what is going on, instantly breaking their private moment. The newcomer apologizes for making them wait and makes a flashy, teasing remark that turns the atmosphere even more awkward. Embarrassed under their gaze, Sojiro quickly suggests that they head back to the lodge. The scene shifts to the quiet exterior of the lodge as the group returns and the commotion fades. Inside, a maid cheerfully says Hotaru-san will be drinking at the dining hall, while Sojiro collapses onto the room in relief and thinks he can finally get a good night's sleep. The maid then calls him master and gently asks if she can speak to him before he goes to sleep. As Sojiro sits rigid on the room, the maid calmly tells him to change clothes, and he freezes in pure shock. She explains that since they are leaving tomorrow, she bought one small thing for him, and Sojiro quietly says he understands. Stepping closer with a bright smile, the maid says she thought he might need to get a little messy, and the mood instantly turns uncomfortably playful. Startled when she begins undoing his shirt, Sojiro demands to know what Sistina is doing, and she matter-of-factly says she is helping him change, just as any acolyte would. As the contact grows far too close, Sojiro awkwardly protests that Hotaru's training still has not calmed him down, making everything even more tense. In the confusion, they tumble together onto the room, and the moment all of a sudden becomes far too personal. Sojiro tries to apologize, but both of them lock up with pounding hearts as the tension becomes impossible to ignore. Flustered and overwhelmed, Sojiro can only whisper Sistina's name while she remains right in front of him. Sistina hesitantly asks if he does not want this, and Sojiro right away denies it. The effect of the spell pushes her past her limit. Sojiro admits he still has not known Sistina for very long, and she anxiously wonders whether this is only happening because of their contract. Just as she starts to accept that, Sojiro all of a sudden pulls her close and firmly insists that is not how he feels. The two lie together in strained silence, breathing heavily as the moment is framed as strangely intense. Sojiro apologizes for waking her, but Sistina happily says she was not asleep and did not want to waste a single moment while she felt this happy. Hearing that, Sojiro quietly says he understands as the tension softens into something gentler. Still flustered, Sojiro says Sistina's name and awkwardly asks if what just happened is really alright after he lost himself without thinking. Sistina says she does not mind and teasingly reminds him that his language decryption skill was not for nothing, telling him to leave everything to her. Sojiro is left stunned as he realizes just how overwhelming that particular skill really is. Trying to steady himself, Sojiro says they should go get Hotaru soon, and Sistina shyly agrees. The room falls quiet except for a faint chattering sound, leaving a brief, loaded pause after the awkward exchange. A woman arrives with a knowing smile and remarks that it looks like the two of them had quite a time. She says Hotaru can see right through them, then announces she is heading to room and suggests the two of them take a dip in the hot springs first. Leaning close to Sojiro, she quietly declares that tonight she will support him, catching him completely off guard. As she leaves, she calls to Hotaru and bids everyone good night. Left alone together, Sojiro and Hotaru stand in awkward silence beneath the night sky, both visibly unsure what to do next. Hotaru timidly offers to help Sojiro wash up, trying to push the moment forward. As she reacts to the outfit, the mood turns awkward when she admits it feels far too embarrassing, even while she also finds it striking. Sojiro flushes and, overwhelmed by everything that just happened, wonders why he is still this embarrassed. The quiet exterior of the inn lingers for a moment as the night settles around them. Back inside, the two lie together catching their breath, and the scene frames the strained silence as an even more tense moment. Resting beside him, Hotaru breathes softly while Sojiro assumes Sistina must be completely worn out too. Lying awake in the quiet room, Sojiro admits to himself that Hotaru's earlier technique was the real problem, and his nerves still refused to settle. His thoughts drift to his additive and spirit transformation skills, and he wonders whether either one could somehow be adapted into something useful here. As he considers trying spirit transformation, the moment is abruptly cut off before he can act. Sistina all of a sudden bursts in and sharply orders him to stop, instantly shattering the mood. Flustered but firm, Sistina calls out to Hotaru and tells Sojiro not to give her that pitiful look. Crossing her arms, Sistina declares that Hotaru should rest for now, and says she will teach him all about magical techniques tomorrow. Then she turns back and pointedly says that, instead, she will deal with his problem herself.